Today we're going to dive deep into a massive historical catastrophe, the fall of an ancient city. But listen, this is so much more than a history lesson. Think of it as a playbook on leadership, consequences, and the insane price you pay for ignoring the warnings right in front of your face.
So I want you to really hold this question in your mind as we go through this. Because the story of what happened to Jerusalem, it's a powerful, almost brutal answer. It shows exactly what happens when the warnings get dismissed and pride grabs the steering wheel.
All right, let's set the scene. We're dropping into the final, desperate days of the Kingdom of Judah. And you got to understand, this didn't just happen overnight. This was a slow-motion train wreck, years in the making.
The whole region at this time was just chaos. The old Assyrian Empire, the big bully on the block, had crumbled. And in its place, a new, even more ruthless superpower was rising, Babylon. Judah was stuck right in the middle, and its king, a guy named Zedekiah, was basically a puppet put on the throne by Babylon. His job was super simple: keep your head down and pay the bills.
And this is where it all comes to a head. On one side, you have the prophet Jeremiah, showing up with a clear but really tough message from God. Just submit to Babylon. Swallow your pride. It's the only way to survive. But on the other side, you've got King Zedekiah, fueled by politics and pride, refusing to listen. He chooses defiance. He chooses to rebel.
And that choice, well, it had immediate, devastating consequences. You don't poke the bear, right? The superpower he decided to rebel against, Babylon, was not about to let that slide. Their king, Nebuchadnezzar, marched his army straight to Jerusalem and just surrounded it.
Can you even imagine that? For almost 2 full years, the entire city was a prison. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. Food starts to run low, then it's gone. The historical accounts talk about horrific famine, constant fear, just total desperation behind those walls.
And eventually, the inevitable happened. The people defending the city were starving, they were weak, they couldn't hold the line. The Babylonian army smashed through the walls, and that's when the real horror began.
Now look, the Babylonians weren't just there to conquer a city. They wanted to break its spirit, and they went right for the heart. They torched the Great Temple, the absolute center of the Jewish faith, the place they believed God literally dwelled on earth. For the people of Judah, this wasn't just losing a building. It was like a spiritual heart attack.
So what about the guy who made this all happen, King Zedekiah? He gets caught trying to escape, and the Babylonians, in an act of incredible cruelty, make him watch as they execute his own sons. And then, as the last thing he will ever see, they gouge out his eyes. A brutal, symbolic end for a leader who refused to see the truth.
And with the city in ruins, the temple destroyed, and the king a blind captive, the story ends. The survivors are rounded up, chained, and forced to march hundreds of miles from their homeland into exile in Babylon. The nation was completely and utterly shattered. It's a dark, tragic story, for sure. But it's not just ancient history. The fall of Jerusalem is like a giant, flashing mirror for our own lives. So, what does this ancient story have to do with you, right now?
Okay, lesson 1 is so simple, but we miss it all the time. Ignoring warnings doesn't make them go away. Zedekiah had every warning imaginable. He knew what happened to other kings who rebelled, but he ignored it. Sound familiar? It's the check engine light we ignore. It's the rising debt we pretend not to see. It's the strain in a relationship we just hope will fix itself. This story is screaming at us. It won't.
Lesson number 2 is a tough one. You can't talk your way out of consequences you've already earned. Once that Babylonian army was at the gates, the time for diplomacy was over. There was no clever escape plan. They had to face the music. We all love to think we can find a loophole, right? A way to avoid the fallout from our own choices. But sometimes, the bill just comes due.
And lesson number 3, this one's a gut punch. What you refuse to protect, you will eventually lose. The people of Jerusalem just assumed the temple would always be there. They took it for granted. They were dead wrong. So what are the temples in our lives? Our health? Our family? Our integrity? These things need us to actively guard them. If you neglect them, they will crumble.
All right, lesson 4 gets to the absolute core of this whole mess. Pride will cost you everything you think you're protecting. Zedekiah's rebellion wasn't a strategic move. It was an ego trip. He thought surrender was weak. He was more worried about saving face than saving his city. And in the end, trying to protect his pride cost him his sons, his sight, his kingdom, everything. Pride is that little voice in your head that says, I got this. I don't need help. It's a terrible long-term strategy.
And the final lesson is maybe the most urgent one. The longer you wait to change, the harder the lesson becomes. This disaster was totally preventable. If they had just listened years or even months earlier, things would have been different. But they waited and waited and waited until waiting became destruction. Life doesn't usually start with a knockout punch. It gives you a little whisper first, then a nudge, then a shove. The big hits only come after you've ignored all the small warnings.
And that's the whole point right there. That feeling in your gut, that concerned friend, that blinking red light on your dashboard, that's not the problem. That is the mercy. That's your chance to fix things before a small crack becomes a total collapse.
So yeah, the story of Jerusalem's fall is bleak. But the reason we're talking about it is actually hopeful. Because for you, right now, the walls haven't fallen yet. You still get to make a different choice than Zedekiah did.
See, unlike him, you still have a chance. You can choose, right now, to listen to that warning you've been pushing aside. You can finally accept the consequences you've been trying to outrun. You can start protecting what really matters before it's gone. You can kill your pride before it kills your future. You can make a change today instead of waiting for disaster to force your hand.
Jerusalem fell because its leaders thought they had more time. They didn't. And that leaves every single one of us with a really personal question. We all have some area in our life where the walls are starting to crack. The best time to fix it was yesterday. But you know what? The second best time is right now. So, what are you waiting for?